Hi, this is Sonia from An Enthusiastic Reader. Thank you for joining me today as I talk about two books that I have read recently that I really enjoyed. I finished a couple of other books and they were for book club, and I just don't feel like I have really anything to say about them. I'm not recommending them, So I'm just going to talk about the two books that I want to talk about and what I'm currently reading and maybe a couple of plans for the future. Okay, the first book I'm going to talk about is Tom Lake by Patchett. I listened to the audiobook narrated by Meryl Streep, and Streep does a wonderful job of voice acting this novel because it's basically told in first person from the perspective of a woman in her late 50s, close to 60, and she is recounting a story that happened in her past to her daughters as they are all sequestered together on a cherry orchard during the summer of 2020. So we all know and have a context of what that was like for our own individual stories. Everyone has a summer of 2020 story, no matter who you are. And because this family is all together and they have very little contact with anyone on the outside, they have some peripheral interactions with people in the community because you kind of still need your community, right? But it's mostly the family doing all of the work. And so the daughters want to hear the story of how their mother briefly dated someone who is now a movie star. And she just kind of laughs it off and, at first, through the years, doesn't really want to talk about the specifics, but now they're kind of pushing her, they're bored, it's the Decameron type situation of we're in a plague, we need to tell stories. And through her telling of this story of when she was practically their age, her very early 20s, first in high school a little bit, and then kind of fast forward to her early 20s, they get to relate to their mother in a way that maybe they hadn't before because she was the age that they are now. And the story is about summer stock. And so there is a sequestered feeling of summer stock that kind of mirrors the sequestered feeling in the present story that they're all having in the summer of 2020. Anyway, the delight of the story is just the way that Patchett has masterfully unfolded the details of Laura's memories and the way she constructs the story to reveal and not reveal certain things to her daughters. And I was so in it. I was listening to it in the mornings. I was going for walks. I couldn't wait to get back to it. It was like a treat, and I finished it very quickly because it was just so charming and so heartfelt and emotional, and what we all look back on our youth with some regrets and some just, ecstasies of just remembering things that happened when we were younger and more free and maybe naive and maybe just foolish at times. And so it's got all of that wrapped up in it. And then she starts to understand her daughters more as she thinks back on the way she was. And so it's kind of comes full circle. And if you like Patchett, I'm a big fan, especially of her family novels. Commonwealth, I thought The Dutch House was fantastic. I really love those very intimate stories that happen between families and lovers and husbands and all of those. It's small, but it can become big, and I thought it was wonderful. So there's that. And the other book I wanted to talk about that I read with Sean, the book Maniac, who talked about this on his Friday Reads, is A Pagan Place by Edna O'Brien. And this was so good. This was a story that is told in second person. Now, Sean was talking about in his video that second person affects him not at all. He doesn't think about it. He doesn't analyze why the author may have chosen this point of view to write from, that he just transposes second person into first person and then that's it. But to me, when I was reading it, you know, I was wondering what is the purpose of telling this story in second person, that I kind of feel like an author has to have a reason, a really good reason of telling the story. So anyway, O'Brien chooses to tell this story in second person from the perspective of the unnamed narrator, as she is like probably 10 or 11 years old, like early puberty, early preteens. And it's the story of innocence to experience. And the first half of the book is essentially about this girl being very observant and watching her kind of dysfunctional parents. Her father is an alcoholic who's really trying to recover, but not always succeeding. And her mother flies off the handle all the time. They get in big fights. Her sister has gone off to live an adult life somewhere else. And so just the daughter, or the girl, the narrator, is just grappling with being a kid and in this situation in the 40s in Ireland. So the war there, Ireland hasn't been fully pulled into the war yet, but they're hearing things about it. There's stories about the troubles that happened earlier in the century that are still kind of reverberating in the community. And she is just completely observant. And then her sister comes home, and that is where the crux of the story changes. And so I wanted to cobble together a few paragraphs. They're all connected. I mean, there's some other stuff in between, but I wanted to just kind of give you the sense of what it's like for this girl to regard her sister as she comes home from the big city to visit. The older you got, the more you aped Emma. You wanted to be blonde like Emma, to be a whitehead, to have a watch, to have a cyst, to have a shorthand speed of 90 words per minute. The doors of the 3 downstairs rooms were open and bits of wood wedged in under the window sashes where the cords had gone. In one room there was lemonade, in another fruitcake, in another cold mutton, all in honor of Emma. You put rhododendrons in a bowl, 1 big flower in each bowl, 1 for Emma's bedroom and 1 for the room where the tea table would be laid. They were big and waxy like stars come down to bloom. In Emma's bedroom, the tin of cling peaches was in the cupboard where it had lain for years and years, ever since the music teacher had given it to Emma as a prize. No one had permission to open it. First thing when she got home, Emma always said, "Are my peaches there?" and ran to look. And in the bedroom, she stood before the oval mirror and touched her hair with a silver-backed brush that was also hers, and which your mother allowed no one else to appropriate. When Emma came home, she went to the village 4 or 5 times a day, and sometimes for no errand at all. She changed her clothes before each journey, and that was why she was called a fashion plate. She asked how the hot water situation was, because she liked lolling in her bath. In fact, she said it was one of her primary pleasures to loll in the bath, and with her big toe to keep turning the hot tap on and off. She said the name of the bath oil she used. She described how it made a veneer on the surface of the water, and how it had the perfume of the woods. The woods Emma conjured up were not like the ones beyond the window, where the old trees reigned and the badgers roamed and the dogs convened at night. Emma's woods were bright and blossomy, as in an operetta. When she fell asleep, you folded the sheet back so that the blankets would not tickle her chin, and you token-kissed her. You brought your face near enough to be able to feel her breath, and then you let your breath mingle, but you did not touch her cheeks or her lips. All right, that was just like a sample of the book as the narrator, as you are discovering what life is about. And it turns out that Emma is pregnant, and that changes the entire dynamic of the family. They are shamed, they don't know what to do, and it just kind of amps up the bad behavior that the parents had before. And as Emma's story ebbs and flows, then the narrator's story also ramps up in drama. And then it all comes to this big conclusion at the end where it all culminates in a cataclysm. So this was really one of the best O'Brien novels I've read. I just want to caution you, if you want to read Edna O'Brien, she has her Irish stories, and then she has her like crazy middle-aged woman adulterous affair breakdown novels and stories. And they're different. They have a completely different tone. So a lot of her short stories are about that period in life where you're divorced and losing your mind, at least in the world of O'Brien's characters. They are all and often become unhinged, lonely, alcoholic, and desperate. So those are completely different from the childhood stories that I really am drawn to. And I think Sean kind of felt the same way too, that when we read the collected stories of O'Brien, it was probably the first thing that we read together about Edna O'Brien's library. And some of those stories, I mean, they were good, but they became very repetitive, and you didn't really have as much sympathy for those characters as the wonder of childhood in Ireland and the family antics are often quite funny before they become quite sad. So that is, that's my impression of A Pagan Place. It was really a highlight. So that's what I have recently finished. I am currently reading Independent People by Halldor Laxness, which is an Icelandic novel that was written in the 1930s, and the acclaim of which ended up winning Laxness the Nobel Prize for Literature later in his life. So it is, I don't want to talk about it because I haven't checked in with my buddy reader Teresa on it yet for our first chunk, but it is really delightful. The characters are very flawed, but you get such a flavor for this Icelandic community that they're living in, and the deprivations of the landscape, and the gods and goddesses, and the magic, and the witches and bewitchment that were the core of their mythology before Christianity came in. So there's like a mix of these old gods and then the new Christian God. People are at odds about that. It's just so interesting. So I'm loving it. And I'm reading a book. Sean has a Patreon, and for his Patreon readers, we're reading a book together called Gray Bees by Andrey Kurkov. And it is a story it's about Ukraine, but it predates this war, but it's kind of after there became a civil war in this geographical location where there are Russian loyalists and Ukrainian loyalists that are having a bit of a civil war on the border of this skirmish, and this beekeeper who lives in this gray zone. And it's a story about, it's funny. It's a story about loneliness. It's funny, sad, another one of those where he is completely alone. His wife and daughter have left him, but he feels like he wants to defend his land and defend his house and take care of his bees because he's a beekeeper. And there's only one other man in the town, and so it's so interesting, but it's also funny. The chapters are short, and I'm really enjoying that too. And so those are what I'm reading right now. I am also dipping into an old book of Alice Munro's called Hateship, Friendship, Courtship, Loveship, and Marriage that was published, I think, around 2000. Angelia is doing this really fun short story project where she's reading a short story a day through the entire month of September. And so that will be a book that she discusses next week in her wrap-up. And I read the title story for that. I'm just going to read a few of the stories that she's reading because she was nice enough to publish a schedule of every single story for the 30 days. Anyway, she has a really great wrap-up of the first 6 stories on her channel today. So the Munro will be coming, but it kind of whetted my appetite for Alice Munro again. I really love her, but I haven't read her in years. So I think all of those stories, even though I've read them in the past, will be practically new to me because I've read a lot since then. So that's what's happening in my reading life right now. Yeah. we had a really fun 95th birthday party for my grandmother this last weekend. And we had family come in from all over. My daughter came, my sister came, and it was just so fun to get a little family reunion going with that. And yeah, not a lot other to talk about. So I'm going to call it and say goodbye, but thank you so much for watching. If you watched all the way to the end, thank you. And please let me know in the comments if, you know, whatever, just say hi if you want. And I appreciate you very much, and I will see you very soon. Bye.